So Razer just refreshed the Blade 16, and on paper, it sounds exciting. A new CPU, more GPU power, and even a higher price tag, sadly. Now, for the processor, Razer did something unusual. They swapped out AMD's Strix Point for Intel's new Panther Lake chip. Was that the right move? Short answer is no. Not really, but there's more to it than that, so stick around. Now, if you look at the exterior design, well, nothing, and I mean nothing has really changed. I even have the previous generation Blade 16, and yeah, it's pretty much the exact same design. You get the same boxy shape unibody aluminum chassis, matte black finish, which is still a fingerprint magnet. Yeah, it's still sharp on the edges, which is obviously really hard to type with for longer sessions. The port setup has also remained the same, except for one thing. Razer has added Thunderbolt support. So now you get a mix of Thunderbolt 4 and 5 Type-C ports, which is a welcoming upgrade for anyone planning to hook up high bandwidth peripherals or external GPUs. You still get a full-size UHS 2 card reader, and all of the USB Type-A ports are running at Gen 2 10 gigabits per second. Razer has also eliminated the braided power cable. Now, this is something that I did notice with the previous generation Blade 16, but I just thought of bringing this up because the new setup is just a lot easier to handle every day. Unfortunately, the right angle connector is still here, so just be aware that you'll want the cable facing outwards to avoid blocking the adjacent USB port beside the power port. The keyboard and trackpad layouts are practically identical. The key travel is solid, and Razer's Chroma RGB is arguably still one of the best lighting setups that you'll find on a gaming laptop. If you followed my coverage of the previous Blade 16, I had experienced trackpad issues with my particular unit. Things like cursor freezes, cursor skipping, there were some random glitches here and there. It was not a great look for a laptop, especially at that price point. But I'm happy to report that on my 2026 sample, I haven't experienced any issues, so maybe I just got lucky this time around. The display is technically the same. It's a 16-inch Quad HD Plus OLED at 240 Hz panel, but Razer has actually been able to squeeze an extra 15% more brightness out of this thing compared to last year. I remember all the displays from at least 2 or 3 years ago were barely struggling to hit 400 nits. So being able to achieve close to 500 nits of SDR performance on an OLED panel is something to be celebrated. The caveat, the panel is highly susceptible to glare, and it just, you can see it's super glossy. At this price point, I really wish that Razer applied some form of anti-glare coating to eliminate that, but it is what it is. Now let's talk about the number that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows. So the previous generation Blade 16 with AMD's Ryzen AI 9 HX370, RTX 5090, 32 gigabytes of RAM was already a lot of money. It was close to $4,500 US. This year's model with Intel's Panther Lake Core Ultra 9 386H comes in at $4,900. For context, that's more than my M5 Max MacBook Pro. Now, the CPU isn't the only change. Razer has also bumped the GPU power allocation from 115 watts to 165 watts. So how does it perform? Well, I wanted to give you some context in terms of what we're going to be comparing this against. This isn't just a Blade versus Blade situation. I've also thrown in the Legion Pro 7i with Intel's Arrow Lake HX and an RTX 5090. We've also got the Alienware Area 51 16-inch model with a similar spec sheet, and the MacBook Pro with the M5 Max chip. So you're getting a proper high-end performance overview, and I'm going to level with you guys right away. Things are not looking that great for this year's Blade 16. If you look at multi-core performance, the new Blade is about 4% slower than last year's AMD model. And compared to the Legion Pro 7i and the Alienware Area 51, it's trailing around 42 to 43%. Now, keep in mind that those devices are a lot thicker with more power being fed to the processors. And it's also important to realize that Panther Lake is not a direct replacement for Arrow Lake HX. The MacBook Pro with the M5 Max is in a different conversation entirely. It's about 45% to sometimes even 80% faster than the new Blade 16 in Cinebench. And remember, it carries the same form factor as the Blade. So yeah, not a great start. In single core performance, the 2026 Blade edges out the 2025 Blade by about 5%. So it's a small win there, and that's thanks to the improvements Panther Lake brings to the table. Now, if we shift to real-world multi-core workloads, pretty much confirms that trend. In Blender and Houdini, the new Blade is about 8 to 13% slower than the previous generation. Yeah, you heard that right. 8 to 13% behind. Handbrake tells a similar story. It's about 11% behind last year's model. And honestly, we kind of saw that coming because the Ryzen HX 370 packs 12 cores and 24 threads. The Panther Lake Core Ultra 9 386H has a different layout entirely. So you have 4 performance cores, 8 efficiency cores, and 4 low power cores for a total of 16 threads. So you're going from 24 threads down to 16 threads. And Razer was also pushing a bit more power to that Ryzen chip on top of that. So at the end of the day, the thread count matters, especially in sustained heavy workloads like these. Now in GPU accelerated apps, it's about 28% slower than last year's Blade 16. And honestly, that's not something that you want to see from a newer, more expensive laptop. Handbrake, on the other hand, is about 9% faster than the 2025 model. But either way, I feel like the Blade 16 from 2026 is struggling to make an argument for an upgrade over the previous generation. Now, where Panther Lake does find its footing is in Adobe Lightroom performance. The new Blade 16 is about 26% faster than the 2025 Blade here. Now, weirdly, Photoshop tells a different story. For some reason, it was trailing behind last year's model. I'm not sure if Adobe has optimized this app for Panther Lake. If we switch over to video editing apps like DaVinci Resolve Studio, the new Blade does come out ahead of the previous generation, finishing export times about 16% faster, but it's not the fastest that we've come across on a laptop. Adobe Premiere, again, really weird. It flips the script entirely. The new Blade, it's coming about 9% slower than last year. So if you're a Resolve user, the performance improvements, I mean, it's good, I'll take that, but if you're in the Adobe ecosystem, it's kind of mixed. Some apps perform really well, the other apps just are trailing behind the previous generation. What about gaming performance? Well, it's again a mixed bag, but the trends lean in one direction. Across most of our titles at 1600p, the 2025 Blade is actually pulling ahead of the newer model. Games like Alan Wake 2, Black Myth Wukong, Cyberpunk, Doom Eternal, Rainbow Six Siege all run better on last year's Blade 16. Some by a small margin, others by as much as 13%. The newer Blade 16 does manage to come out ahead in Baldur's Gate 3, Counter-Strike 2, and Hogwarts Legacy, but when you're paying $400 more for a laptop that's supposed to level up on the previous generation, that's just a tough pill to swallow. And the same thing can be said with 4K results. Now let's talk about thermal performance, because this is where things get really interesting. Razer Synapse gives you 3 power profiles to work with. You've got balanced, performance, and custom, which allows you to set the highest level of power being allocated towards the CPU or the GPU. Now in that mode, it's feeding around 70 watts to the Panther Lake chip, which is less than what Razer was feeding the Ryzen CPU last year at 75 watts. And yet, despite drawing less power, it's running hotter than the previous generation. It's also louder, so there's more noise, more heat, less power. That's just not a great combination. On the GPU side, it's a bit of a different story though. The power levels in custom mode are averaging around 137 watts on the new Blade versus 134 watts last year, so they're essentially the same. But the 2026 Blade runs cooler and quieter during gaming workloads, sitting around 72 degrees Celsius compared to 78 degrees Celsius on the previous gen. So to sum it up, under heavy CPU workloads, the new Blade runs hotter and louder, but under gaming workloads, it's actually cooler and quieter. Now, this is actually the perfect time to bring in the Razer laptop cooling pad, because everything that we just saw with those CPU temperatures, I mean, the timing couldn't just be more fitting. Now, this thing works on 2 levels. The first one is passively cooled, so it elevates a laptop, allowing to improve the airflow underneath. And the second option is, of course, actively cooling it with an adjustable fan speed that can be controlled through software. And Razer has an exclusive mode for the Blade 16 called Hyperboost, which essentially is enabled through Razer Synapse. Now, this thing does support laptops from 14 inches to 18 inches. It comes with different magnetic frames to fit various sizes and chassis types. And the smart cooling feature automatically adjusts the fan speeds based on your real-time CPU and GPU temperature readings. So what does that actually do for the Blade 16? Well, the CPU temperatures dropped from 88 degrees Celsius down to 80 degrees Celsius, matching what the previous gen was doing in its stock configuration. The clock speeds went up slightly, but here's the part that really caught my attention. In Razer Synapse custom mode, you normally can't run both the CPU and GPU at the high setting simultaneously. One of them has to be set to medium. And that's because of the cooling limitations that the existing current chassis configuration has. But the cooling pad seems to bypass that limitation entirely, allowing both of them to run at high at the same time. So it's pushing the GPU into a bit of an overdrive setup. So it bumps up the power by about 15 watts. GPU temperatures actually fell from 72 degrees Celsius to 67 degrees Celsius despite the higher power draw. So you're getting more performance and lower temperatures, and that translates directly into gaming as well. If you're running Cyberpunk at 1600p, the new Blade in its stock config averaged around 107 frames per second, but with the cooling pad, that jumped to 114 frames per second. So it's about a 6% bump in average frame rates. The 1% lows really convey a better story, especially when it comes to the smoothness. It went up from 87 all the way up to 95. The 2025 Blade also benefits from the cooling pad as well, so it's certainly a nice to have accessory for those long gaming sessions. Just be aware of the additional noise that it brings on top of an already loud gaming laptop. Okay, so before I get into battery life, I need to flag something that seriously concerned me during the testing period. At idle situations, the 2026 Blade was pulling around 31 watts, sometimes peaking at 41 watts. And the culprit is the RTX 5090. It's supposed to sit around 4 to 5 watts when it's inactive, but it just keeps waking up every few seconds, and it spikes up to 25 watts each time. There was this one occasion where after battery test, we came back to the laptop only to find that it was burning hot. It was completely unresponsive. The screen went blank. The fans had stopped spinning entirely. The CPU was over 100 degrees and all the cores were throttled at 400 megahertz. So after a hard reset, it eventually recovered. And that specific situation only happened once, but the idle power draw issue was consistent throughout our testing period. Now, Razer did send out a firmware update to address this issue during my testing phase, and to their credit, the fan temperature issues were resolved, but the idle power draw, it's still high. And this isn't just a sensor readout quirk. The laptop will still drain in under 3 hours doing absolutely nothing if it boots into that state. And for nearly a $5,000 machine, that's highly concerning. So with that context in mind, let's talk about battery life. Now, under light load, when we didn't get that idle power draw issue, the new Blade does something surprising. It lasts about 70% longer than the 2025 Blade 16. And it doubles more than what Legion and Alienware can manage. The MacBook Pro still leads the pack here, but the gap is closer than you'd expect from a gaming laptop. Now, if we switch over to gaming, that's where the battery converges on all the Windows laptops. They all land in the same ballpark of around an hour, hour and a half. That's the max you can get out of these things. So you just have to plug it in when you're gaming regardless. So where does that leave us with the new Razer Blade 16? I think that this laptop is designed towards a very small niche demographic that's craving for the absolute best performance in a slim chassis with premium build quality, a great display, a really good keyboard with one of the best RGB setups on the market. And of course, if you're finding things like Thunderbolt useful for your workflow, then yeah, this thing definitely fits the bill. But it raises a question that's hard to ignore. Why change the CPU at all? Because the HX 370 was faster across the board. The Panther Lake chip, it runs hotter, it's louder, it has a lower thread count, it loses in most gaming titles to its predecessor, and it comes with the idle power draw issues that firmware updates were only partially able to resolve. And you're paying, again, more money for it. So the obvious answer is to just get the previous generation Blade 16, save a little bit of money, and skip this entirely. I guess the only real benefit is the longer battery life and lighter workloads, but you're not buying a Blade 16 just to browse the web. It's supposed to be doing other things as well. So yeah, that's the 2026 Blade 16, guys. It's slower than the old one.